It's a new month. That means it's time once again to go back in the wrestling time machine. And as always, I'm joined by my friend, Billy Garcia.
Hey, glad to be back again for another great episode.
Well, I mean, I'm glad you keep coming back. I don't know. I mean, it's maybe you like the topic, maybe you like the back and forth, but either way, we're up to another territory.
Yeah. This one is another very, very noteworthy territory. When a lot of people think wrestling, they think of Memphis wrestling, and I really can't imagine what the business would look like without the contributions of Memphis wrestling territory.
I agree. I mean, the old saying is that everybody went through a lot of people went through two territories, and that's Bill Watts and Jerry Jarrett. A lot of talent passed through the Memphis area.
For sure. In the past, I've talked about certain territories that are the pillar of the business, and this is one of those territories.
I agree. Well, for those watching, which by the way it may not happen right out of the gate, but Billy's fans always come out in drones watching these videos, so I appreciate that from your fans.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really blessed in that territory, that they're very loyal. And what I do also like is that that together we've exposed some of these people to wrestling. They weren't wrestling fans per se, but we exposed them to it, so they gave it a shot. Now they like it.
Yeah, and now if only I could work together with the WWE to gain people onto their network, which by the way, you could see a lot of this footage that we talk about for $9.99 a month. First month free, of course, on the WWE network, because there is very few tape libraries that WWE don't own.
Good point. We might even get into a little bit of that when we touch on the USWA, because that's pretty much its value right now is the tape library.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if we're going to jump into things, I think we kind of the meat of the territory kind of gets started around 1977, even though it existed long before that. It was one of those territories that was born around the same time as the NWA was born. It was one of those founding members of the NWA, this territory. But the territory itself took on its personality, in my opinion. Back in the original promotion, which was NWA Mid-America, kind of had its big split when the two owners, Jerry Jarrett and Nick Gulas, started really going at each other backstage. They did not get along. Many websites called it heated bickering. Some even go even further and call it other things, but I guess heated bickering is enough. Since I wasn't there, I'm not going to claim that they got the shoving match or anything. But having said that, they couldn't coexist, so they split. And when they split, Nick Gula kept the NWA Mid-America, but it didn't work out for him. He ended up shutting down and retiring. Meanwhile, Jerry Jarrett, who got together with Jerry Lawler, who was the big name of the territory, and in my opinion still is. He's synonymous with Memphis wrestling. They formed the Continental Wrestling Association, the CWA, and they had the success that Nick Goulas did not have. They were selling out. They had a TV slot at Monday night. This is before the Monday Night Wars, and I think they came up with the idea of the Monday Night Wrestling. I can't look. I've tried to research a little bit to see who else had wrestling on a Monday night before the CWA, and I couldn't find anything. So it looks like they came up with the idea.
Yeah.
So Jerry Lawler and Jerry Jarrett also managed to get a working agreement with the WWF, and which brought in a mighty have. One of my favorite talents, of course, is Randy Savage. This is one of the places where Randy Savage kind of learned his craft. And many of the others, Kamala, oh boy, he's another one of my favorites. Hulk Hogan, of course, a lot of people have heard the stories of Hogan in Memphis and how Terry Boulder would become Hulk Hogan, and the gimmick change was definitely a career changer. Jimmy Hart is also from the territory. King Kong Bundy, Jimmy Valiant, Jackie Fargo, Sputnik Monroe. They were so many big names. But if I could really touch on the name that kind of made the biggest difference, he technically wasn't the worker. I think you know where I'm going with this. He was an actor-comedian named Andy Kaufman. And the feud between Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler brought national attention, not only to the Memphis territory, but to pro wrestling. And everything that happened after that really spawned from this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I believe that was 81, 82 in that area. But it was just Southern wrestling in general, it was taking off at that time because, you think about it, Flair wins his first title in 81, and then Andy Kaufman and Jerry Lawler on The Tonight Show, and then the Von Erichs and the Freebirds in the end of 82.
Yeah, it was a great time to be wrestling. That was sure.
I agree.
Oh,
I agree. Well, the one comment I have to make is the one thing that Nick Goulas leaves on the wrestling business is having a list. The only son with less talent than Mike Graham.
Oh, okay. We start off with a kick to the nuts right off the bat. All right.
Well,
you say this for the middle, but all right, let's just start it right from the bat. Let's get somebody.
Well, anybody who has seen, heard, or knows about George Goulas knows he wasn't that good.
Yeah. I mean, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. We usually say our Pearl Harbors just for, a little later, but yeah. Let's jumpstart this.
Yeah. Well, and and anybody who saw our Florida retrospective knows I'm not a fan of Mike Graham. So if I'm praising Mike Graham, that just shows how bad George Goulas is. So, yeah. But also to mention it, if anybody wants to know more about the split between Nick and Jerry, Jim Cornette does talk about this, not just the fact that Jim grew up in the Memphis territory, with the Memphis territory. He worked for the Memphis territory as his first territory, and I believe Paul Heyman may have too. I don't remember if it was his first or I think it was his first territory as a manager, because I think he was a photographer. He did photography in WWF to start, which would make sense because he is actually from New York. But I think Paul may have made his big push in AWA before he went to Jim Crockett Promotions. But we're not talking about Paul. If I will also mention this because I've heard the story of Paul. If you want to hear Paul tell a funny story about his time in Memphis, it's also on YouTube. Just look up Paul Heyman in Memphis. I don't remember word for word, but let's just say Paul wasn't a big fan. Jerry became not really a big fan of Paul Heyman after that promo. So just look it up on the YouTubes.
Nice. So around '89, everything got so national with WWF and WCW and all that CWA actually joined the AWA in an attempt to sort of compete with the national prominence of the Big Two, and to put it bluntly, that failed.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's no way to sugarcoat it. It failed, and that failure led to that merger with Fritz Von Erich's promotion of World Class Championship Wrestling, and the rise of the next territory that I'll cover is the USWA. But before I get into that, I don't know if you want to wrap up the CWA here.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, I don't know that there's a better way. I don't know if talking about CWA and not covering the somewhat working agreement they had with Bill Watts, where Bill and them actually did do an interpromotional trade. I know who went to Bill in the trade. I just don't remember who went to Jerry. But let's just ponder this. What would have happened if Dennis, Bobby, Ricky, and Robert and Jim never left Memphis and stayed and never went to Mid-South?
Wow, yeah, that would have changed the course of wrestling, I think, for sure. Wow, yeah, because what you just mentioned pretty much led to the rise of my favorite promotion of Jim Crockett promotion, and you know the way those fell. It's hard to imagine how those dominoes falling any different than the way they did, because it would be a totally different landscape even today. Like we wouldn't see what we would see today.
Yeah. And the other question you have to ask is that another thing we lost from the territories going under, that we will never see interpromotional trading? And I'm not talking about branded trading. I'm talking about interpromotional trading, meaning between two different promotions, like WWE trading, Bray Wyatt to go to TNA for James Storm.
I hear what you're saying. Yeah. I think when one day one of these number twos, because I consider Impact Wrestling and Ring of Honor tied for number two, and I'll even when New Japan Pro Wrestling is tied as number two, the three-way tie. When we see at least one of these, maybe two of these, rise up to where the ties number one with WWE, then I think we'll see the trades happen again. But so long as WWE is clear-cut number one, then I think they'll continue to push their kayfabe interpromotional, multi-promotions, their kayfabe with SmackDown and Raw, and who knows, they might one day bring back ECW as their kayfabe third promotion or something like that. They might even do WCW their kayfabe third, which I wouldn't mind seeing. But it's at least by seeing them do this, like their kayfabe multi-promotions, like at least we get an acknowledgement by them that wrestling at its best requires multi-promotions to be on top. Like, you can't have all one promotion and then everybody else be like just providing talent to that one promotion. It's got to be multi-promotions at the top. And at least they acknowledge that by doing this whole brand split.
Yeah. Well, I will say that NXT is sort of a different promotion, but I also just want to mention from last month with Portland that Memphis and Louisiana, because Louisiana was sort of Bill Watts' home base, they weren't the only territory that did the trades. World Class in Portland did too.
Yes. Oh, it was huge. I think we mentioned when we did Texas, some of the big names that came into World Class courtesy of that trade, and what a major impact it had.
And just to throw it out there, World Class did have the door open in All Japan. Yes, from the Von Erich's relationship with Baba.
Yes. We I think we touched on that as well. But yeah, I totally agree with you on that, and yeah, as we move forward, into
Scratch that, it was the
territories, or not the other territories, but the other promotions in this territory. I think we'll kind of touch on how their working agreements with the WWF and when they had that, it worked out great, and then when it got snatched away, it's promotion killers.
Yeah. Well, I was just gonna say that it wasn't the Von Erich's relationship with Baba, it was actually the Funk's relationship with Baba that opened the door for Texas, because the Funks actually worked in All Japan. During that era. But back on track, and I just wanted to, before we wrap up the CWA and move to USWA to the more 1990s and beyond, I just wanted to bring up some names, to talk about some names a little bit, and that is the Fabulous Ones.
Oh, the Fabulous Ones. They were, people of today's era might not have heard of the Fabulous Ones. You kind of had to have a love for 80s pro wrestling in order to really appreciate the Fabulous Ones. They were like sort of maybe not antithesis, but they were Memphis's version of the Fabulous Freebirds and the Rock and Roll Express, and that flamboyance that was going on during that time. It's like, just like later on, everybody had to have their Road Warriors. During this part, everybody had to have their flamboyant, strutting tag team. And the Fabulous Ones fit the bill for Memphis.
Well, that's actually the reason why Jerry would feel comfortable getting rid of the Rock and Roll and the Midnights, because of the fact that he had the Fabs.
Exactly. That's not going with it. But it's because they didn't just take a gimmick that was suddenly like super popular. Like I was mentioning, the comparisons with like the Road Warrior gimmick suddenly became super popular, but they actually did it better than most.
Mm-hmm.
And they had the talent to sort of back up the gimmick, because that's also part of it. When you get tag teams that like the Fantastics, no offense to the Fantastics, they did not have the same talent that the Fabulous Ones had, so the gimmick didn't work as well for they were still over, but they didn't get put over like the Fabulous Ones did, because the talent wasn't equal. So when you have kind of talent, you have the gimmick, then you have some latitude to where when the other tag teams kind of want more money and they want the top spots, you can sort of let them go and say, well, yeah, go pursue that more money, go pursue that top spots, like they did with the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express. Which on a personal note, I am a huge fan of the Midnight Express, especially the beautiful Bobby and the Squeak That Lane version. Mm-hmm. I am a huge to that's the most underrated tag team in all of pro wrestling history, in my opinion. But like I said, they're one of my favorites.
Yeah. I'm actually just looking to see if I could find who went to Memphis in the trade. But I did find out that actually there was actually intention before Memphis merged with WCCW to actually have them merge with AWA and become one promotion.
Yes, I mentioned that in 1989 they joined the AWA, and that failed miserably. It was, I didn't go too deep into why it failed, but let's just say the AWA was making a lot of bad decisions during that time, and they were on their last leg. They had a lot of talent that AWA and went to WWF almost simultaneously, which hurt the AWA. So that brief merger with the AWA didn't benefit the CWA like it would have if it had happened earlier in AWA's history.
Now just think, what does AWA have in common with another territory? Go
ahead. I'll let you.
Maybe having a guy who's good at finishes but not good at much else.
Right. Exactly. Our guy, the Hulkster, what you gonna do, brother, when this is where the power lies? His promos are almost all identical. But I'll admit, as a kid, I totally marked out there.
I mean, I was actually referring to Greg Gagne, but...
Oh, okay. Yeah, they both wrestled. Yeah, true. Okay.
Well,
Greg Gagne. Well, yeah,
Mike Graham.
Greg Gagne, he kind of benefited from who his brother was. But,
Mike Graham.
Yeah.
Who said that?
Yeah. But, Bird was making so many bad decisions at that time. That merger did not help the CWA. It would have if that merger would have happened a few years earlier.
Yeah. Well, the only other name I could think of from the CWA days is the man himself, Superstar Bill Dundee.
Wow. If there was anybody that, besides Jerry Lawler, that personified the CWA Memphis wrestling, it was Superstar Bill Dundee. For whatever reason, their cousin, Wayne Ferris, became the big star for a long time when he took on the persona of the Honky Tonk Man. For whatever reason, it's one of those unexplainable phenomenons. But Bill Dundee was so talented. So talented. And his promos, like, there were times, like, if you watch the footage, there were times you could hardly hear out of his promos because the crowd would pop so hard for him. But yeah, the other thing I liked about Bill Dundee was, for a guy that was quote unquote a pretty boy, he bled balance. He was one of those guys that you could always count on. Before the term hardcore ever existed, he can run a technical match. He can go hardcore. He could tell a story within a match. He could do it all.
Yeah. Well,
the only thing he wasn't blessed with was that he wasn't 6'8".
Well, I'll tell two stories to segue into the USWA. The first one is that I believe it was Raven who said on his podcast that at Bill Dundee's size, he must be blessed with something to be a convincing heel at about, I believe, 5'3", 5'4"?
Yeah. Well, I think they're rating his stature a bit. But yeah, I think he's like 5'5", 5'6", around there. He was not a tall guy at all.
Yeah.
But he was built, he was in great shape. He had a great look to him. And I said he could run pretty much any style.
Mm-hmm.
And you would look at him and never think that, like I said, that he would be a guy that would juice. But he bled gallons.
Now, we move to the segue of, we will segue back to Bleeding Buckets and, talking about other stuff like that later, but to segue into the other story, and which also opens the door for the USWA, is Jerry Jarrett would go to his talent and tell them, stay off the juice, we just signed a working agreement with WWE, and Dutch Mantel says to Jerry, you barely pay us enough to live. You think we can afford juice? I mean, you think we can afford the juice?
locker room was like during that era.
Yeah.
With so many of these great moves that put the foundation of what was to come in the coming years. On a very, very side note, I would be remiss if Jarrett is so involved that an extremely young Jeff Jarrett got his start at CWA.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you watch the old footage of him, he was this little skinny, young, fresh-faced kid that, I don't know if he really was a team or not, but he sure looked it.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, we may be leaving some stones unturned with CWA, but I don't know how much there is to speak of with the USWA other than outside of their working agreement with Vince.
Right. Well, when we get into CWA, let's just re-mention or reiterate that it was born when the CWA and World Class Championship Wrestling merged. And that was because Jerry Miller had bought out Jerry Jarrett. I always say Jeff Jarrett when I mean to say Jerry Jarrett. He basically bought him out and then merged the two together because that failed AWA merger didn't work out for them. They with Lawler, they were able to sign a working agreement with the WWF, and what's significant about that is the talent that came from the WWF over to USWA. People like Owen Hart, Bret Hart, Razor Ramon, Shawn Michaels, Lex Luger during the Lex Express gimmick era. And the most significant of all was that a certain guy got his start in the USWA. A guy named Flex Cavana, if you know who this guy is. Flex Cavana would eventually make his WWF debut under the name Rocky Maivia. It didn't go over, by the way. But he would go on to become The Rock. So that was really significant that this is where he got his start, was in USWA. And then in 1995, which is what really hurts here, the Monday Night Wars started. And that was the death blow to USWA because Vince needed all his troops for the Monday Night Wars. Mm-hmm. Like, as things would progress in the Monday Night War, WCW would go on a run where they were the number one wrestling program for I forget how long it was, 80-something weeks, something, I forget what it was. It was a long time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so Vince needed all his troops. He couldn't lend them out anymore. And that, together with the USWA not being involved in any way in this Monday Night War, plus Jerry Lawler getting pulled away from the USWA into the WWF's a more prominent role with the WWF, to sort of add more troops to the war, all that pretty much fell due for the USWA. So then the attendance got really poor. There wasn't much in the way of top talent. Because of the poor attendance, there wasn't much money, so they were having to rent out these really terrible venues, which created a sort of avalanche of bad luck. And by 1997, Lawler sold the USWA to a businessman who basically couldn't do a damn thing with it and ended up shutting it down almost immediately. So here's my question to you. I've really been looking forward to asking you this question here. In my opinion, like, Jerry Lawler squeezed the last drop of that lemon right before he sold it, and basically sold something that was completely useless to some business guy that didn't know any better. Do you see it that way? Like, Lawler ripped this guy off? Or do you see it different?
I mean, I agree. I mean, the company folded right after, due to having the Mike Graham of Memphis and Hector Guerrero of Memphis leading the charge of the territory. And if you want to, And if you want me to explain the reference, the Mike Graham of Memphis is Brian Christopher. And the Hector Guerrero of Memphis, no offense to Hector Guerrero, is Doug Gilbert.
I couldn't agree more. I will say he inherited the library, or not inherited, but he bought the library along with the company. Like, this is something that, if he had even just a little bit of wrestling smarts, he would have turned around and sold it to Vince almost right away, especially after the Monday Night Wars have ended.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I would have went running to Vince right away while there was some value. The longer you wait, the less value there is to it.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. And that's not to insult Hector Guerrero. Hector was a good wrestler. It is to insult Mike Graham. But it's just, it got to the ECW point where you have people running at the top of the card that weren't capable to lead a company.
Wow, that's a great analogy. Especially considering the context of what era we're talking about here. It's a great analogy.
And now, before we shift gears, I think there's one person that we would be adverse not to talk about, and that's Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert, because one of the people that had a large impact on the territory of Memphis due to his association with both Jerry's, Superstar Bill Dundee, and also, I believe, Eddie would eventually leave Memphis and head to Mid-South to have one of his more successful runs with the Hot Stuff Incorporated.
Yes.
But, Eddie Gilbert goes as hand in hand with Memphis as basically any of the other top guys that have walked through that door.
Yeah, and like like Lawler and Dundee, he had a good mind for wrestling. He wasn't just an in-ring talent. He had a great mind, and he was one of those guys that, as great as his mind was, like, there was no wrestling, pun intended, the controls away from Jerry Lawler. Like, Memphis was his. So what Eddie did except go? Like, in the end, that's what it came down to. What could he do except go? Maybe I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but I just felt like it was such a death grip that Jerry Lawler had on Memphis that a lot of people, like, not just Eddie, but a lot of people had no choice but to go somewhere else if they wanted to be the top guy. Because, like, I'll give you an example. Like, Jerry Lawler, I have a stat here. Jerry Lawler was a 52-time Memphis Wrestling Southern Heavyweight Champion. So, if he's 52 times the champion, like, what room is there for somebody else to be the top guy in the territory?
Yeah.
You're basically a transitional guy. You wear the strap for a couple of weeks and then Lawler has it back.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say that, number one, this is also 52 times over about 30 years. It's not 52 times, over the span of 10 or 5. It's 52 times in about 30 years because Jerry was winning it into his 50s.
True. But having said that, it's not like, a lot of these years was not like modern wrestling where you had a new champion like every other month. A lot.
Yeah.
Back then, in that era that we're talking about, the 80s and the early 90s, you would hold on to the belt for, a year, sometimes multiple years at a time. So, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of wiggle room for somebody else to be the top guy. And Eddie Gilbert had the stuff, pun intended, to be the top guy in Memphis. And even for a while, to have his turn. And, he had no
Mm-hmm.
He had great runs, but I just feel like we never saw Eddie Gilbert have his big turn. Like he never had. Like I feel like other people like Hands of Stone. No, I forget his name. I can't believe I'm slipping in his name. Well, Beacon Flair.
Ron Garvin.
Ronnie Garvin. Yeah, I feel like he got a turn deserved. Where there were guys like Eddie Gilbert who never got the turn.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the what was I gonna say? It feels like Memphis was sort of, especially near the end, Memphis was sort of you know, okay, you feud with Jerry Lawler for a bit, maybe you win the belt, and then Jerry wins it back, and then maybe you have one more match. But, Eddie wasn't the only person that maybe wanted the book, but for those who don't know, it was basically, Jerry Lawler wasn't the booker all throughout the year. He split the booking with Jerry Jarrett.
Right. No, yeah. But you know that's what I was getting at. Like it was Jerry was the big star though. It was just understood that this whole thing revolved around Jerry Lawler. I mean, the whole thing revolved around Jerry Lawler. So whether it was Lawler booking it or Jarrett booking it, it was understood it all revolved around Lawler, and there really wasn't much room for anyone else at the top. If you were coming in like to work an angle, but there was no belt involved, sure. But you know, there was a reason why so much talent, you know, towards the end, like just left. There was a reason for it, and it's because they were. Part of it was the Monday Night Wars, and then people pulling in talent, but also part of it was that the talent themselves wanted a shot to be the people at the top, and they were never going to get that shot in Memphis with Lawler, with everything surrounding Lawler. Well, he being the Hulk Hogan of his territory.
Yeah. Well, with that being said, I think it's pretty fair to move into the last territory on the docket, Jim Cornette's Smoky Mountain Wrestling.
Yes. Well, this was founded in 1991. So, Cornette had his. We all know him from his days in Jim Crockett Promotions. That's where his my favorite stuff that he's ever done is that. But after ECW left the NWA, this was like Jim Cornette's chance to kind of take Smoky Mountain Wrestling and make it prominent. And so they moved in as the NWA territory, and they actually held the tournament to crown a new NWA champion. Shane Bedliff did what he did, and he dropped the belt, the NWA belt, and declared himself the ECW champion. Well, it was Jim Cornette's territory. Smoky Mountain Wrestling now held the tournament, the crown a new champion, which was won by Chris Candido. Another one of my favorite guys. I like Chris Candido a lot. Just like every territory that I spoke of already, here's another one that had a working agreement with WWF. and not only with the WWF, but what was different with Smoky Mountain Wrestling is they were producing stars for WCW, for ECW. They were a factory of talent. People, let me throw some names out, if that's all right.
Go ahead.
Holly, Balls Mahoney, Chris Jericho went through there, Al Snow, King, D'Lo Brown, of course Sonny. If you're going to have Chris Candido, you're going to have Sonny. Lance Storm, the Road Dogg, Jesse James, and Cornette himself. One team
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how you feel about him. I'll let you say how you feel about him, then because I think it's obvious how I feel about him. I wouldn't have mentioned him if I didn't like him.
Well, I mean, I think Cornette did what he does best and made Smoky Mountain a little bit different because it felt like Smoky Mountain was focused on the tag team wrestling rather than singles wrestling, and he sort of made it more of a tag team territory than a singles territory.
Yeah, well, you know, it was a popular mantra of that era. I think it was. I think it might have been Paul Hayes that coined the phrase, accentuate what you're good at, and I'm totally botching this mantra, but it's basically focus on what you're good at and sort of hide what you're not good at. And in ECW, they were good at the hard stuff, and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, they were good at the tag team stuff. So Jim Cornette took what they were good at and really focused on it, and that was the tag team wrestling. And I mentioned the heavily bodies. There was a lot more than just the heavily bodies, but I just feel like they got overlooked because of the, you know, Vince McMahon and the size thing. He always had to have giants, and they were not giants. They were I'd say like the same stature more or less as the Midnight Express and some of the other tag teams that Jim Cornette had produced in the past. But I thought they were just as good. Didn't get their just due though.
Yeah. There's only a few other names that I would want to talk about from Smoky Mountain, and that is, one of them is somebody that really, I guess, found his footing and found his way in Smoky Mountain, and that's the underrated Nature Boy Buddy Landel.
Yeah, there's another one that great call right there. There's another guy that had the talent, had the mind, had a great gimmick, but because he wasn't 6'8", didn't get his just due when he transferred to the big time. But at least in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, he had a chance to show what he's got, which is a lot. He was another one of those wrestlers. Now, we could probably rattle off several of these things because this was the era of just when the Monday Night Wars had started. Is again, Smoky Mountain Wrestling in December of '95 is when they closed the doors, and '95 is when the Monday Night Wars ended. Started. And so a lot of these talents didn't fit what the Monday Night Wars were all about. If you look at the people in the Monday Night Wars, you had on one side you had the Outsiders, Hogan, and they're all like massive, huge. On the other side you had the Undertaker and the Rock, and these are all tall guys. So it was like the battle of the giant. And literally, the Giant kind of swung the pendulum a little bit when he went from WCW to WWF. These other territories who didn't have these giants, who had great talent. You mentioned Buddy Landel. I mentioned the Heavenly Bodies. There's probably a few more that we could throw in there, but that all don't have that side and were victims of their era.
Yeah. Well,
I think if they were around today, they would push.
Well, for those who don't know the Buddy Landel story, Buddy was actually going to get a push with Jim Crockett Promotions, but due to his personal demons, he lost his push, and it seemed like, from what I've heard and from what I've seen, Buddy finally found his way when he got a chance with Jim and Jim Crockett and Smoky Mountain Wrestling, but in no uncertain terms, it was a little too late.
Yeah, he fell victim to the era. Smoky Mountain Wrestling, like I said, they when they shut down and Jim Cornette went to work for the WWF full time, it was Vince McMahon getting his soldiers in line for that Monday Night Wars that had just spawned, and Buddy Landel was a victim, along with several others, that it just didn't fit the mold of what either side of that Monday Night Wars wanted for the war.
Well, now I also think that maybe at that time it was because of age, because Buddy had been doing it for a good amount of time. But, I mean, well, also maybe cocaine's a hell of a drug, but...
Yeah, that's probably a lot more to do with the age.
But, you know, but the positive side of it is that Jim Cornette also was responsible to getting a lot of people jobs with WWE and also some with ECW, like Jericho, Lance Storm, the Gangstas, D'Lo Brown and Kane in WWE. He even got Tracy Smothers a job in WWE, the Dirty White Boy, Tony Anthony. I want to say Steve Keirn, because I'm almost 100% sure Steve Keirn was Skinner, but I don't think Jimmy was the one that got him the job. I think Steve might have been working WCW at the time. But either way, Jim's knowledge of, well, I'll put it this way. The story of it is that I believe Jim made the call to Vince when the working agreement was on to get Taker to come down and work with Kane.
Right, yeah. And, wow, yeah. Well, Kane, when we first put on the gimmick, he actually had the name Doomsday. Like, that was like the original name of the gimmick, was Doomsday. And it wasn't until Taker came down that the whole idea started to formulate, with the whole idea of maybe Kane could be the Taker's long lost brother, and that started to form. So yeah, Jim Cornette was in the whole middle of that.
Yeah.
And you know, not to go too deep into the history of Taker and Kane, because that is a very, very deep history. But the spawn of it was basically, you know, was thanks to Jim Cornette's being with Smoky Mountain Wrestling, having Triple H was there under that gimmick, and then Jim Cornette being hired full time with the WWF. All that, if that sequence would have never happened, then we'd have never got the whole Kane as the Undertaker's brother.
Yeah.
And storyline and angle.
Yeah, and just to throw out a few other people, like I mentioned, like I did when we were doing Portland, you know, Primetime Brian Lee also worked in Smoky Mountain. Doug Furness and his brother also worked in Smoky Mountain. The Armstrongs, I think Steve also did too. I could be wrong. Bob, I know, did. Bob Armstrong. Jimmy Golden. And, one of the Fuller brothers, I think Robert, you know, as the stud stable. Like we mentioned, Jericho and Lance Storm. You know, and to throw it out there also, Tracy Smothers actually did get his start in Smoky Mountain. And I know you mentioned Bob Holly earlier, who also ended up getting a job with WWE from Jim Cornette.
Right. Yes. They started out, I believe, what was his first gimmick in the WWE? Was it the new Rockers, or was it the Auto Racer?
The Auto Racer.
Oh, good Lord. Poor guy.
Yep. Because he was one of the job gimmick guys. With T.L. Hopper, with Rad Radford, Louis Spicoli and Rad Radford, Tracy Smothers, Freddie Joe Floyd, Skinner. I think Fantaso actually got his start down in Memphis too.
Wow. Yeah, see? It was a deep rock Smoky Mountain Wrestling. They should have had way more than just 4 to 5 years worth of success. They should have continued on for a long time. But as we let off, we're going full circle here. When we let off this territory, we kind his territory and kind of wiped them all out. And that's exactly what happened to Smoky Mountain in the end. When they got wiped out by the Monday Night Wars. And I know Vince McMahon has a long-time standing reputation as a territory killer. But I don't think he can get the sole credit here. He definitely was a big part of it as being one of the two major players in that Monday Night Wars.
Yeah. Well, I also think that it goes back to, and like you said, bringing this full circle as we wrap things up, that there were few promoters that Vince actually had respect for. Most of them were going along the Gulf Coast, as in Eddie Graham, Bill Watts, and Jerry Jarrett. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about Bill Watts when we cover Mid-South, but would you agree that maybe with Don Owens and Eddie and Bill, that Jerry Jarrett's right in there with people that Vince had tremendous respect for?
Yeah, I think it still is, because when Vince bought the WCW and the Jarretts began TNA, Vince could have easily came in and just squashed them, because they were in such a delicate state. They were relying on a week-to-week pay-per-view, and Vince just let it go with Jerry Jarrett. And you know, to this day, even when Jeff got involved back in what would later now is Impact Wrestling, they went through so many name changes. I'm confusing myself here, trying to think of the names here. But even when Jeff got re-involved, bringing his merging his Global Force Wrestling and all that stuff, I mean, Vince had another chance to squash them, because he actually Dick Carter appear on the WWE Network to talk about Kurt Angle. So he had the inroad to squash these guys. But because it was Jarrett once again involved, Vince just let it go. He didn't jump on it.
Well, now let's not get this wrong. Vince doesn't have respect for the Jarretts, he has respect for Jerry.
For Jerry, true. But that's, Jeff is Jerry's son. So,
well, there's no love lost between Vince and Jeff, and if you don't know what I'm talking about, you could probably find it on the internet, either from Jim Cornette or Jim Ross, or, not Jim Cornette or Jim Ross, Jim Cornette or Bruce Pritchard.
Right,
as they both have probably spoken about it.
Jeff will never work for the WWE again. Never.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a given. I think we all agree on that. But he could have got squashed easily.
I agree. I agree.
And it wasn't because Jeff that he didn't get squashed. It was because of Jerry.
Yeah.
The respect you were mentioning is there.
Yeah.
So I agree that if Vince and Jeff were ever be put in the same room, somebody would probably punch in the face.
Yeah. Well, now, and this also goes back to the Vince and Jerry working relationship, because Memphis was actually one of WWF's first developmental territories, but what I was going to bring up was that I feel like Jim took the booking that he was doing in Smoky Mountain, and to end the 90s, took it to Ohio Valley Wrestling with Danny Davis.
And that made Ohio Valley Wrestling such a prominent territory that it eventually became a developmental territory for the WWF, WWE. I don't think that would have that territory would have been as prominent without Jim Cornette. In fact, I'll say it even better. It wouldn't have been prominent at all without Jim Cornette. Jim Cornette's arrival pretty much led to everything else that Ohio Valley accomplished since. And even today, not to this day, but even later on when it became a developmental territory for TNA, all that was residual from Jim Cornette's days in Ohio Valley Wrestling and Jim Cornette's involvement with TNA.
Well, I mean, there's no doubt that Jim helped put Ohio Valley on the radar, but
put him on a map,
yeah, but now looking
and
back,
that's not to say that they didn't have talent.
Oh yeah,
I'm not trying to say that, but
yeah. Now, but looking back, as always, what do you think the lasting legacy of Memphis Wrestling is, And if you could pick one feud that maybe helps accentuate your point of what you think the legacy is, now's the opportunity, as always.
Okay, well, the feud that automatically comes to mind, it's of course Jerry Lawler on one side, but Jimmy Hart was on the other side as a heel faction, sending heel after Jerry Lawler. And that's something that the WWF kind of borrowed. Let's be blunt, they ripped them off. They ripped off the idea entirely, but they just put Hogan in the spot. But yeah. But that feud pretty much, is what built Jerry Lawler and played a huge role in building Memphis' status as one of the premier territories of pro wrestling in the United States. And that's their legacy. They're one of the premier territories of pro wrestling in the United States. And when you think of pro wrestling, like, one of the territories that immediately comes to mind is Memphis. Memphis, Florida, and Texas are the first three things that pop into my mind when I think of pro wrestling.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, the best way to echo the legacy of Memphis wrestling is there's a reason why when Dusty would walk around in North Carolina and the territory used to be held by Jim Crockett Promotions, people would recognize him. And there's a reason why to this day people still recognize Jerry the King Lawler in Memphis. And I'm assuming probably not just Jerry Lawler, but also Jerry Jarrett, Dutch, Jim Cornette, others from the territory. As my cat enters the shot, but there's a reason why Jerry is still noticed in the territory, and that says to the legacy that Memphis wrestling is left behind, that the talent that they had is still noticed to this day by fans.
No question, and it's not dead. There's promotions running in Memphis, and from time to time we get pay-per-views in Memphis from the WWE and Impact Wrestling, and it definitely is still life to that territory. It just doesn't have the big promotion to sort of carry the banner, because Impact is based out of Nashville. So they technically count as a Nashville promotion.
They're moving to Canada.
By a Canadian company.
They're moving.
Now, and,
they're moving to Canada.
Here I go again. Go ahead.
They're moving to Canada.
Yeah, because they're owned by a Canadian company. But yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
But they're not Global Force Wrestling anymore. They're not being Impact, by the way.
Yeah. Before we put the kibosh on this installment of the series, there's one name that we need to bring up, and that's the voice of Memphis wrestling, Lance Russell, who unfortunately passed away recently. Yes, Lance did have a very long life. I mean, no offense to him, but there was a time when I thought that Lance had passed away, and I was surprised and happy to find out that he didn't.
Yeah.
But that just shows, in my opinion, there's a point of being famous and being a celebrity. Lance Russell was famous. Yeah, and he was the voice of Memphis for wrestling in Memphis for a very, very long time. Yeah. But you had Gordon Soley in Florida and Georgia. You had Lance Russell in Memphis. Yes, 100%. I definitely put those two in the same category. And I'll even go a step further. Gorilla Monsoon was the voice of wrestling in the Northeast with the old Triple WWF. So if you lived in the
New York or Connecticut area, like it was Gorilla Monsoon's voice, you would always hear. Lance gets his name mentioned alongside those other names. He's that good and that important to wrestling.
And just to put it into perspective a little bit more, you had Lance and Gordon were the voice of the territories, and Jim Ross was the voice of the 90s.
Yeah.
So people say Jim was the greatest announcer of all time. I mean, it's hard to argue with, but was Jim the greatest announcer of an era? Yeah. But if not the best, the close second to both Gordon and Lance, it's just hard to call Jim the greatest announcer ever when he wasn't really commentating with Lance and Gordon in the same era.
Right, yeah. Jim Ross, I don't remember him before Jim Crockett Promotions, or even if he announced before Jim Crockett Promotions.
I think he did a little commentary in Mid-South after Bill wanted, I think when Bill wanted to go more national, he put Jim in the booth, but that was only for about a year and a half. He was in the booth for Mid-South.
Okay. Yeah, my first exposure to Jim Ross was with JCP, and he and Tony Schiavone, but Schiavone was one guy.
That's the thing. That's the late 80s. That's the late 80s, and Gordon and Lance were both into the 70s.
Right.
In Florida and Georgia and Memphis. So it's hard to compare because they had, and I know how humble and modest JR is, that he would probably say he's not the greatest, and he would put the greatest to either the greatest announcer, Gordon or Lance Russell, because I don't think you can say that Bobby Heenan and Jim Ross are the same type of announcer. So I don't think you can put them as the greatest announcer as Bobby Heenan, color commentator, Bobby Heenan.
Yeah, color commentator, Heenan won, and Lawler maybe a distant second.
Yeah. Or maybe Jesse, or,
Jesse's another guy, Jesse Ventura, yeah, for sure. But yeah, announcer, I have to agree with you. As far as those guys being the top guys, and then an honorable mention would be like a Joey Styles.
I would agree. I mean, I would agree with that Joey should be up there in at least the top 10. Or maybe even a distant fifth in the top 5, because I'm sure, some would say Mark Lawrence and Bill Mercer, or Bob Caudle.
All right.
Bob Caudle in Georgia with Freddie Miller. So it's, and then you have the modern with, Mauro Ranallo and, Mauro Ranallo.
Yeah. Yeah, the verdict is still out on all the modern guys here, so I wouldn't even include any of the modern guys in the conversation just yet.
Argumentatively, without Vince, Michael Cole is a really good announcer. Without Vince in his ear, Michael Cole is a really good announcer, and gets a lot of shit, but people don't realize that it's Vince that is the reason why Michael is as bad as he is, not because of Michael not having talent.
Right, no, he has talent. I agree. And, you probably, Vince in his ear, it's probably a big deal. That was one of the things that Joey Styles didn't like about the job, was having Vince in his ear sort of making him neglect what was going on in the ring and just tell a story and perpetuate angles and stuff. At least that's what he said on YouTube, on one of the YouTube interviews I saw. But, maybe one of these times we should do, when we run out of territories, start covering, best announcers, best color commentators,
Yeah,
so we'll sort of do a best of.
Yeah, for sure. Anything to keep the monthly series is going. But with that being said, like I said before I mentioned Lance, it would be inept talking about the Memphis territory not to talk about the voice of Memphis wrestling.
Of course.
But with that being said, we've come to the end of another territory video, and as always, I'd like to thank Billy Garcia for joining me for another monthly retrospective into the Memphis wrestling territory.
It's always a lot of fun for me. Thanks for having me.
So with that being said, let me just say this down in the comment section below. Leave your feedback on this series, and if you have any ideas of where you want us to see where you want us to go next, let us know down in the comment section below, because as always, feedback is more than welcomed and appreciated. But if you don't want to leave a comment, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to ding dong that notification bell to always know when a new video comes up on Wrestling Express. Until next time, we'll see you next month.